Welcome, welcome. We are here on part 2 of our 3-part series. We're very happy that you could come together in this way to share and to expand our appreciation of the outdoors. You all already have your own connections with nature. We are hoping to share some tools that can help strengthen those connections and to help make you an even stronger caretaker of nature. A great way to do that while we're learning is to ask questions. So tonight, please type questions in and I'll ask some of our speakers who are here tonight to answer those live. I am Carly Rose, the Community Engagement Manager with the Environmental Science Center. As our name suggests, we are an environmental organization and we're working primarily in South King County, Washington. We assist students, families, and adults in becoming environmental stewards, and we are extremely fortunate that we are still able to operate with some of our school programs and community programs like this in the digital environment, and even sometimes out in the actual outdoor environment. These natural areas in which my organization works, and likely from where you are joining us, if you are here in South King County, have been stewarded by the Coast Salish people since time immemorial. Most are on ancestral unceded lands of the Duwamish, and I want to acknowledge the land and the connections within it. I hope that you join me in honoring those tribal members of the past, those who are here with us today, and those who will come with future generations. There is much gratitude for Native educators who continue to share their intrinsic knowledge, their scientific knowledge, and especially sharing that through Lushootseed, which is the local language of this land. We are also fortunate to have sponsorship from the city of Burien for this presentation, which happened last year. We're having it again in a new format and are very thankful for this because the intention is to inform you about your watershed, some of the issues within it, some of the tips you can have to help maintain its health or increase its health, and some ways just to appreciate these natural treasures. All of us are within a watershed right now, which means we can all make a difference within it. The watershed is an area where all the land drains off into one place, one body of water, such as a river or a stream or a lake. I mostly grew up in Florida, so watersheds were a little different there. And when I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I think of the ice and snow literally melting and shedding from the mountains as it streams into the streams and the rivers, out into our Puget Sound, and ultimately out to the ocean. Plants are a big part of our watersheds. They provide stability, they provide nutrition and safety to many species and systems that they touch. But those are just a couple of things they provide. Research is now showing that trees and plants themselves have way more connections amongst each other than we once thought. And this is in partnership with the fungus that's underground. For centuries, people have sought solace and inspiration in nature. And these past months of being homebound and quarantined have increased that drive to get outside. This is in line with new research that uncovers the public health benefits of urban trees and natural areas, which we're going to talk about in this session. We will hear from 2 speakers, both from Forterra. We have Yeates Lakehart and Daniel Cuevas. They will share the growing research on the importance of urban forests to our hearts and to our minds. They will also present findings from Forterra's 20-year Urban Forest Stewardship Plan, which includes the health of Seahurst Park's forest in the city of Burien. Allie is Forterra's program manager for Green Cities. Allie is a self-described plant nerd who fell in love with Emerald City's urban forests and scenic beaches upon arrival in Seattle. Allie originally came to Forterra as a master's student working with the Cedar River Stewardship Project. This helped define their personal passion for engaging urban residents in their local communities, which is why we are here. So please send questions their way. Daniel is the Community Stewardship Coordinator for Forterra. He has worked with the Washington Department of Ecology as a Teen Youth Corps Supervisor. He managed an endangered species program. He has served in various crisis intervention programs and leads bird walks with the Tahoma Audubon Society. Please welcome both Daniel and Allie and ask away.
All right, well, welcome everyone. We are so glad to be here, and thank you, Carly, for inviting us. And I just love sharing about this. I actually live just in White Center. You heard that Daniel's from Tacoma, so we kind of, we're cradling. We're on either end of South King County. So this is a place that's really near and dear to me. I'm at Seahurst all the time, visit and use parks all the time, and also I live here. We all live here, and so the urban forest is where you live. Like, we all live here, and it is all around us, and we're so lucky to have it. And so hopefully tonight get a little more information on kind of like what is going on with Burion's urban forest. If you have questions about that, I would love to. I can get pretty detailed. I can geek out really hard on that, kind of what we've been doing, and also kind of where we're headed. And so for a little bit, I wanted to take a minute and ask everyone to take a breath and maybe to think about a place or a tree specifically, maybe it's just one tree, that when you picture the urban forest, that is what you picture. So for some people, it might be a tree that they used to climb in their backyard when they were a kid. It might be a specific park or a specific place. Honestly, it could be a shoreline, right? And just like standing at Seahurst on the shore and looking up behind you at the urban forest. But I think we oftentimes, for me, when I see a city, I see the buildings. And I think when you look aerially at a city, you get those chances, you really realize that isn't, at least where we live, the predominant kind of color isn't gray all the time. It really is green. And so it's just a good reminder to kind of think about all of those little nooks and crannies, those little special places, those little sword ferns, or maybe it is maybe it's a garden, maybe it's a food garden that you love, that are the plants that make up the urban forest around us. So I work with the Green Burien Partnership, and there are several entities that are working together to do this. City of Burion's working with us, Earth Corps is working with us. We have Partner in Employment that's been providing some youth crew time, and we are so lucky to be funded, and my job really, actually me, but we're funded by the Port of Seattle. And so Port of Seattle did give the seed funding for the initial 3 years of startup for the Green Burien Partnership, as well as Green SeaTac and Green Des Moines. And so that's kind of what I get to do. I work for Forterra, and we are like contractors with the port, and we are starting this really incredible partnership. And we're so glad to have, I see some of my forest stewards on the call, so that's really exciting. Work with community organizations and churches and all sorts of people. And Forterra is, it is the state's largest land trust, but it's also a sustainability organization. Some of you might know that we have been working a little bit to address housing, because we've done a lot of work with securing natural spaces, and that puts pressure on our urban forests, and it puts pressure on our housing markets. And so we are securing urban, rural, and wild places for building a sustainable future. And so there are people at Forterra who are working with food justice, and there are people who are working with housing justice. And then, Daniel and I kind of really work on some of those urban forest issues, but we work as well to hopefully provide some environmental justice. And Daniel's going to talk about that a little bit more. So this is kind of the partnership as it stands, but there's so many entities on this as well. There's other nonprofits, like I mentioned, churches. There's so many volunteers who are adding so much value to this place. We'll hear about them in a little while. But we are the Green City Partnerships, and you'll hear a little bit more if you don't know about Green City Partnerships, or if you don't live here, about all the places that have made a commitment to caring for and restoring the urban forests right here. So every city that you see in green is a city that has committed to taking a look at the health of its urban forest. And some cities are actually also looking at canopy cover, like percentages. Seattle, Tacoma, Burien, SeaTac, and Des Moines got to take on this. It's pretty rare for a small city to do something like this, but thanks to the port funding, they were able to. But a lot of cities that you see on this map who are not in green are actually addressing similar things, like Mercer Island. And so they're definitely part of our partnership. We really appreciate them. But they haven't gone on this journey with us. But it's a very similar process. Everybody gets a 20-year plan. Everyone has stewards caring for parks, which is pretty cool. And right now we're serving, actually it's getting close to 2 million people. And we have 15 cities and then Snohomish County, 14 cities in Snohomish County, so 15 entities. And you might be asking and hearing a lot about urban forests and kind of asking, so what did these cities take on? And so a lot of cities in our network are working in their public lands. So they're talking about street trees potentially, but specifically forested parks is like major commitment as part of the Green City Partnerships. But here in Burien, as well as SeaTac and Des Moines, we're also looking at school trees, which we'll talk about. We're helping look at private land. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But all of these trees, any tree that exists in the city is part of the urban forest. And so when we talk about canopy cover, you might not think of it this way, but the trees that you have at your apartment complex or the trees that you have at your home, they're actually giving benefit to every single person in the city. So, they're doing the hard work for sure, but I just want to say that by having trees, even if you're in an apartment, by renting a place that has trees, by visiting a tree that you love at a park, by going to a school that has trees in them, we're actually contributing to the urban forest. So you're actually part of the partnership just by living in Burien. It's actually a really kind of a special place. And SeaTac and Des Moines as well. And it's just a good reminder that we all live here. And when I see this picture, it is really, to me, very human centric, but just a reminder too that there is so much wildlife. I think of Arbor Lake Park in Burien and all of the people I've met there who are constantly really birding at that beautiful place and have the migratory birds coming through. There are shorebirds that show up there, hearing about all the wildlife that live in Burien. We can talk about how salmon contribute to forests and how forests contribute to salmon. Those things exist. So we are all living here together, and all of our trees are providing us benefits. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about what some of those are. And then Daniel's also going to share a little bit more as well. Trees clean the air. They can remove 50 pounds of particulates in a single year per tree, a conifer specifically. Actually, cedars are really good at it. They have those little scaly needles. And so those are they really cling to a lot of particulates. 20 minutes in nature can lower stress hormones. Air filtration is actually something that they're starting to value. It's valued at $261 million these days. So from trees alone, which is pretty incredible. And that's just in our state. And then, trees definitely sometimes they cause me allergies. So they can cause respiratory problems. But in general, by cleaning the air, they actually reduce cases of asthma, 670,000 cases nationwide annually. I love this one because it's really interesting to me. Every 1% increase in its city's usable green space results in a 4% decrease of anxiety and mood disorder treatment. So trees actually help us reduce stress. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then of course we know that trees buffer noise, and talk about I-5 and 5, like all these big roads that we know we have. We talk about airplanes. We know that trees are really important for reducing noise pollution. And so that's incredibly important in South King County. Trees also help climate. I know Burion's taking on some climate action goals, and so really looking at a climate action plan. And it's important to note that right now, I'll talk about this again, but the goal set by council and approved in the plan was a 10% increase in canopy cover, similar to some of the goals that are being pursued in other cities like Redmond. And that should generate a 2-degree Fahrenheit reduction in ambient heat, which is pretty cool. And this is actually a statistic from Washington. And then, having trees on your property, while they may be expensive, as a new homeowner, I'm learning this, they actually reduce heating and cooling costs by 8 to 12%. And so they actually regulate the temperature extremes on your property, which is pretty amazing to think about. And that can, it kind of makes you start to go, maybe they're worth a little bit, maybe they're worth the maintenance that they take. We also know that, we talk about stormwater a lot in our area. We talk about it all the time because of our wonderful salmon that we want to keep healthy. But tree roots actually hold soil in place, so they reduce erosion. But the interesting thing is they increase water infiltration. So the soil itself filters the water, the stormwater. And then when it moves through the city, it gets cleaner when we have more urban forests. So it's incredibly important for watersheds to have urban trees. Obviously we have a lot of stormwater here. We still need our stormwater management plants and things like that, but trees are incredibly important. And we know this, of course, as well with all of our steep slopes, right? We really don't want to see the land wash away into the sound. And so retaining trees is incredibly important, as I think a lot of people know that, but also just thinking about the incredible filtration properties of trees for water is really cool to me as well. We also want to make connections. I love talking about human health and trees. This is kind of a big graph, so let me just kind of explain it. You're in the middle. And when we talk about how all of these things impact you, they do. And, we know that when we look at some of the choices we make, that's really important, but some of the choices our community makes. So we talk about, we look at how our lifestyles are set up and, the walkability of where we live, or is there shade along our streets? Are we interested? Like, is it just interesting to walk down the sidewalk where we live? We talk about the air and the land, but we also have to talk about the biodiversity and the climate stability of our area. If you live on a street without trees, it's going to be hotter in the summer. You're going to be less likely to want to go out for a walk. Those are the pieces that really, we don't think about it every day, but they are subconsciously affecting the decisions that we make, which is pretty cool to think about. And so these are all the pieces that make up health. And it's important to note that, land, air, and water, especially trees as well, are part of this. I like this too. This is some really cool stuff. All of these studies that we're talking about, by the way, I know a lot of people think, oh, well, it's got to be just that the socioeconomics of that area, that's different. Or maybe this is an area that, it's different than other places. But all of these scientific studies that we are researching, that I've added to this, I did check, they control for that. So basically they're saying that if you don't have those factors in play, are these things still true? Because we know people come in all sorts of varieties. We're incredibly diverse. And we have, unfortunately, lots of different, there are some of us who have more privilege, there are some of us who have more oppression. And so how do we kind of get a real numbers on what these benefits of nature are? And so they actually have done studies, and they remove those factors, they control for those factors. And what we see is that if you have more biodiversity, you have less anxiety, less depression, and less stress. And that's controlling for socioeconomic factors. So even if you are not as wealthy as other people, if you have more biodiversity in your neighborhood and where you live, you will have less depression, less anxiety, and less stress, which is pretty incredible. And it starts to make me really think about our structures and how we build cities and how we invest money and where we do projects, and really kind of start to look at, and Daniel will talk about this a little more, that idea of environmental justice and restoring some of this biodiversity throughout the city in a really equitable way. Some people ask, this is Dr. Kathy Wolfe, who's fantastic. This is actually some of her slides, so that's why they look a little wonky. Glad to say that I get to personally know her because she's pretty amazing. But she kept getting these questions, and I've kept getting these questions. So like, what is the dosage? Because everyone, you can see these are 2009, 2016, 2017, 2019, sorry, 2019. Everybody wants to know, how much nature do I need? And it looks like for stress, a 20 to 30 minute session, walking in nature in a Seahurst, in an Arbor Lake, something like that, that's going to be stress reduction. For depression, they actually say about 30 minutes per week, pretty low. That's not that much. For blood pressure, to see changes, looking at one garden visit per week, but if you can do 4 or 5, looks like it's a really statistically significant difference. And then if we can get 2 hours in nature per week, if we can get 200 to 300 minutes, that's the peak. We actually have a high well-being, and I could share these resources. They are available, but those are all available. You can Google them. But yeah, pretty incredible that scientists and doctors are starting to kind of get and hone in on where the benefits exist. Like, how much do you need to really have some of these benefits? Which I think is really fascinating too. And there are differences between walking in downtown, going over like to the library or the press or things like that, and then walking in a Seahurst or some area like that. But it's important for me to know, a lot of what I read really supports that it doesn't need to be out in the Cascades. You don't have to go to Olympic National Park to have these benefits, that you really can have them in a forested park, which is really cool, right in the city. So I'm going to let Daniel take it away from here. We are so glad to have Daniel joining our team. He comes to us, like Carly said, with lots of really cool experience. And he and I will be working on a project that he's going to tell you about. So Daniel Cuevas is going to tell you a little bit about all the cool things that we have going on.
Thanks, Sally. Hello, everybody. I'm very grateful and excited to talk to everyone tonight about a really cool project that we're doing with the Highland School District. Next slide. And the landscape scale restoration grant with Highland Public Schools, funded by DNR, and enhancing the urban forest and canopy cover. Now, the purpose of this partnership is to develop urban forestry projects on school grounds and in nearby areas using student-based engagement community models. And with this model, we want to empower students to engage peers and local residents in urban forestry projects, which improve human health, student learning, civic engagement, and watershed resilience. With these, we will also address the environmental inequalities in low income and racially diverse areas that are often left by the wayside when cities or local governments or organizations are thinking about urban forestry or environmental type programs. And next, I will give y'all a brief introduction or a brief reminder of what we're talking about when I talk about environmental justice, because we are dealing with low income and racially diverse areas, trying to bridge that gap of closing out those inequalities. We gotta just do a quick refresher. So environmental justice, according to the EPA, fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people of all backgrounds in respect to the development and implementation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So what do we really mean by that? What it really means is when we say fair treatment, means no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, governmental, or commercial operations or policies. And when we talk about meaningful involvement, people have an opportunity to participate in decisions about activities that may affect their environment and or health. The public's contribution should influence the regulatory decision process. Communities' concerns should be considered in the decision-making process, and decision makers should seek out and facilitate the involvement of those potentially affected by said proposed laws, regulations, or policies. And two examples I can think of off the top of my head of where environmental justice was not taken into consideration: the water, the state of the water in Flint, Michigan, and also the Dakota Access Pipeline. So this is going to be a brief introduction not to this crowd, but a brief review of environmental justice. And next slide. Cool. So getting to our Highland School project. This is a really cool project where we are wanting to expand and build up urban forests within schools and the surrounding areas. Now, I want to ask everybody, have you ever, you can think this internally, have you ever been to a school where there's not been much green cover, not much canopy cover, just very urbanized, not many trees? And have you been to a school where there was a lot of green? So I have been in both situations, and really when I think of those schools that have so much greenery, like my mood just goes up, and also you want to go to school a little bit more, maybe not, but I did. And we see here that actually views from school windows with more tree cover and greenery can increase test performance. And with graduation rates as well. Urban forests and natural areas are vital to the health of our region and our cities and their citizens. Trees and plants of urban forests reduce greenhouse gases, sequester carbon, contribute to the economy, and benefit the public health as well. So while we're talking about the urban forest in general of cities, with the Highland School project, we want to focus those in the schools and within those local communities, which I will talk a little bit more about in the next slide. Okay, so here we have canopy cover in relation to schools within Burien. Burien, one of the cities that we are focused on with this partnership, is because we're focusing on Burien for this presentation, but also mainly because I want to draw your attention to the disproportionate scale of the amount of canopy cover within the city compared to the school. So the partnership looked at canopy cover in relation to the schools. There are 6 Burien schools that have a canopy cover of 10 to 20% within a quarter mile, much less than the city's average of 30%. Within a quarter mile of all Burien schools, the average canopy cover is 22.5%. Again, that is a lot lower than the city's average of 30%. And that's not only in Burien, we also see this in SeaTac and in Des Moines as well. And why this data, right? Why is this important? Well, with this social vulnerability and school canopy data, we can help this partnership plan future projects to center the equitable distribution of trees within the city. Already, Forterra and the Highland School District have received $300,000 grant aimed at encouraging youth participation in increasing and maintaining canopy cover throughout Burien, SeaTac, and Des Moines. And I want that to be really key. Student participation, which we'll go over some more within our goals for this project in the next slide. Now, we all learned from Allie that trees provide us with great benefits in urban forests. When they were talking about a tree that, just kind of imagining a tree that we would sit in or just look at, I was taken back to my time in college in Texas. I would sit under one tree and just listen to the wind blowing through it. And that provided me with so much just calm and joy. And we want to bring that to the schools, especially the schools and the communities where that might not be readily available. We learned how from Ali how the benefits of walking in nature can lower stress hormones, the sequestering of carbon as well. And the main goals for this Highland School project is to bring this all forward to these local local community areas where there have been social and environmental inequalities. Now, looking at goals 1 and 2, we want to empower students to take the lead of their community and future. And that means we want to make them stewards, right? We want to make them and give them the tools and the know-how and have the confidence to really go into their community and make these changes, or know that they deserve these changes to have a green, healthy infrastructure. In one of our talks with the school district, we were told that a student thought it would be really cool to have a food garden. I would really love to make that happen. Just things like that of students says, I want a food garden. Yes, let's make that happen. And then we are in dialogue with the students, with the schools. Okay, how do you, the students, want to take charge of this to better your community? And with goals 3 and 4, we not only want to take it to the Highland School District, we hope that this expands to other partner cities and communities, because the increase of biodiversity, opportunity for exercise, healthy mental health, and overall improvement of these schools, which will benefit students in addressing these inequalities and basically bring environmental justice to the forefront of urban forestry.
All right, thanks, Daniel. That's awesome. And I'm excited. I think some of you have been, if you've ever seen me talk, you probably heard about this. It kept coming on the horizon and now it's here. So we're excited to do it. I mean, COVID has been a real challenge for all of us. And so we're trying to work with Highland Public Schools to figure out a way to make this happen. And I just really appreciate Daniel and our students and our partners who are so excited about this. If you are listening from a partner organization, just know that we are planning some kickoff meetings in the new year to really kind of get a chance to get to know people and hear from not students, absolutely, and then also hear from parents and then neighbors. So just kind of seeing what is needed really and what is wanted. So hopefully as well, you'll be hearing from students. We'll probably be doing a lot of outreach to students, and then there is a piece of this that students will actually outreach to the community. So pretty incredible. We'll see how that goes from a virtual space. But I just want to also talk about and we talk about it, and I know some of you are really aware, I can see some of your names on the participant list, that we do have threats to our urban forest, right? We painted this really beautiful picture of all of the ecological, the economic, the personal benefits. I mean, I don't mind. I don't identify as neurotypical. I have ADHD. So for me, nature is medicine in so many ways, and going out in nature is medicine. And so, I feel those benefits every day. But I also have to recognize there's a lot of economic benefits that I don't often think about. And so investing in urban forests is good for everyone. But we know that there are threats. And, I really am we talk a lot about development. We know that's a problem, that sometimes development happens and sometimes it's blatantly not following the rules. And sometimes it's just trying to do the most with the littlest means. And so that means the most environmental degradation, because that is kind of how to do things inexpensively, that happens, right? And it's not anyone being malicious, but it happens. And we talk a lot about non-native species, but specifically aggressive weeds, invasive weeds, colonizing weeds. I think our community in urban forestry is still figuring out how to talk about those. And I've been asked by some people who are very wise, and some of them are native, to start thinking about how can we think about native versus, or like invasive species, I should say, as just a plant that's trying to live, but then often needs our help to control. It doesn't share well, so our help to control its spread, because if we don't, then other plants, don't have a place to live. And so I can think of a lot of things that are like that, right? That kind of take over. But I also wanted to mention, just because Carly said, like, the other things that we are trying to start thinking about as a community, and I encourage stewards to start thinking about this too, is how do we restore natural processes like those mycorrhizal networks? Like, how do we restore soil health? When we think about, the threats to urban forest, we often don't think of salmon, but we know that there are nutrients in salmon that used to get pulled into the urban forest and create these really lush Pacific Northwest soils that just don't happen anymore. And that probably affects this fungus. It probably affects a lot of things. And so, I think that's kind of what I think is the next step to this, is really looking at what are all of the actions that are impacting our urban forests, and how, especially as climate change is becoming a reality more and more for each plant and person and animal that lives here, how do we just reduce that stress? And the other thing I also want to say when I talk about environmental justice is, I was mentioning this before, but trees are expensive to maintain, and right now there are no policies, so there's no laws that I know of that actually help homeowners care for their trees, even though we know trees are helping everybody in our city. And so that's something that I know that we've been tasked with as Forterra, and the city is looking at too, like, how do we write policies and find monies to support people keeping their trees, because it's not cheap to hire an arborist. And if you don't, then you might, have improper tree care, and then that tree might die. So there's a lot to talk about there, but we should keep going. So I'm going to keep going and talk a little bit more about, Burean's urban forest today. And so, like, when I look at this is what I see. This is our city. And yet, it's green. We think of a city, we don't think of this, but this is what it looks like when we take a picture of Burien from the air. We did write I'll say it. I wrote a lot of this, a very large plan that was passed finally through council November 2nd. It was really awesome, and we all got to celebrate. I do wish we could have, gone out to have a adult beverage or a toast of water or something, but unfortunately that's not how life is right now. We are all very excited, thanks to Brandy and other people from the city, Casey, just all these incredible staff members. I feel so loved by all of the staff members from all three cities, but especially Burien. It was actually really fun in the end to write something like this and do it together. And I know it was, it's just really incredible to get to work with all the organizations and everybody, all the residents who made comments and made it possible. And so what we know is that Burien has a 30% canopy cover. That's what canopy looks like. If you were looking at the city, I won't say from an airplane, as a bird flying over, and you look down, it's the amount of, in the summer, I should say, or before the leaves fall, it's the amount of, of cover, of obscurity provided by the trees, their leaves, their branches. So if you think of shade, it's the amount of shade on the ground from trees. And then we know that, like every city, it's not abnormal to have a disproportionate distribution of trees. So we have a lot of trees near the sound. Makes sense. We have some laws that protect trees on slopes. We have some laws that protect, shorelines and things like that. But also, let's be real, that's where most of the wealth in Burien and other cities are concentrated, is right on that coastline. So if you have the money, you probably can have a larger property. You probably can have trees on that property. And then, of course, there have been other reasons that trees have been removed or sometimes improperly maintained. I mean, Burien hasn't had control of many parts of the city for a long time. As it's incorporated different areas, I think there's some different management that's happened over the years. And so on the right-hand side, in the red, orange, and then yellow to green, So red being the most vulnerable. This is looking at sociodemographics as well as exposure to pollutants. This is another EPA a data source. And then on the left-hand side is our trees, and they're green. I mean, there's other things here. You're looking at all of the gray is going to be all your parking lots and impervious surfaces. All the blue is going to be the water. But, to me, the green stands out. And so you can see that in a lot of the more, the least socially vulnerable areas, that's where we have higher concentration of canopy. And so some of our projects, like Daniel was mentioning, are to hopefully make some improvements in some of those areas where we need it most socially and where we need it most ecologically. And so this is another graph like this, but I concentrated it for you. Where are trees? I think a lot of people would say parks. Nah, trees in Burien are in private land. That is where trees are. 56% of the canopy of that 30%, cover are in our homes and apartment buildings, businesses. That's where we see. And actually, I think on this one, no, that is true. Yeah, this is just residential, not even businesses. So 56% of canopy is just in our homes and apartments. So that's not abnormal. That's pretty normal, actually. But it's a good reminder that only 30%, and I have a grass yard sometimes, so some of it's native and like planted and some of it's grass, but only 30% of residential land is covered with canopy. But it has almost 60% of canopy. So it's the greatest potential to add canopy, and it's the greatest potential to retain canopy. And I know some people are really like working to do this, and we are joining with them to help figure that out. But we did actually do a little percentage of, we know how many trees we would need to plant to get to 40% canopy cover. It's only almost 40,000 trees, which is a lot. We'd have to plant 2,000 trees a year for 20 years, which is a lot and expensive. But that 10% canopy cover would actually provide $7.3 million in ecological benefits. And that's actually $500,000 per year in ecological benefits. So pretty incredible to think about. And that is looking at some carbon and things like that, but that's a pretty low rating, honestly. I think carbon, we're seeing those numbers go up. And so, our goals with this partnership is to steward and care for the urban forest with people like you, volunteers, and, some professional crews and professional support, and with the Environmental Science Center and schools and all sorts of people. Hopefully retain the canopy that we have on parks and private land as much as possible, but specifically in parks. And then hopefully keep this going. So it's not just, the 3 years that was funded by the port, but actually it becomes part of the city. And Gabby Gonzalez and other people are really taking it on as part of the job. And I love working with them. So it's really nice to see that happening. We have been doing yard distributions. We just did one in October. It was really successful. We have a virtual tree walk. We've been planning tree walks, and now we're writing them for the internet. So that's a little different, as well as a tree care training, getting that done virtually. We've done lots of webinars like this, and did another one with Paige and others from the cities. And then also we do have an opportunity for anyone who's living along Des Moines Memorial Drive to apply, not for, if you want one of those giant, beautiful elms that's very, very large, let me know. But to apply for kind of a more yard-sized elm tree, which is called a frontier elm. It's specifically grown specifically made for this area, for our zone is what you call it, like our gardening zone, and it's beautiful color. So if anyone lives on Des Moines Memorial Drive and wants an elm tree, you could talk to me. And so talking about canopy retention, I'll do this kind of quickly, but a lot of Burien's tree canopy is in parks, that is owned by the city, and all of us, right? People who pay taxes, anyone who lives here. And so, it's really important that we care for those 326 acres of forest that exist in Burien's parks. And these are all of the areas that have forests. So these have enough forests to be ecologically functional. Like they might have wetlands, they might have some areas that aren't canopy, but there is a natural area there is a forest there. And so what we actually did is we did these health assessments on every single area. So I actually have all the data. I can tell you all of the top tree species in Seahurst and all of the top invasive species. And you can look at slope, and we could talk about the soil and all those things. We've done assessments on that. And so when we look at Seahurst, what we want to see is this dark green would be awesome. That's the most healthy. And what I noticed is some of the areas that people have been working in are actually working. Because what I notice is where we see like areas, I know that the environmental science center has worked in some of these areas, like we see progress happening, which is pretty cool. I know Earth Corps has worked in some of these areas as well. And then also we know that there are some areas that have like a pink color or a yellow color. They just are shoreline or they are wetlands. So they are just going to have on this axis low tree composition normally, right? A wetland would, but it also has low invasive species presence. So, you know, anything in this column is pretty great. What we kind of start worrying about are areas that we get into these kind of like these colors here, the purple, kind of orangey color, and then that really light green. And this is a good question for me. I don't know. I think some of this is actually, I know we just got some big grants to do some of this. So I think that light green is actually supposed to represent the 94.6. This green here, I'm sorry, they're not exactly matching right now. But I think, I don't know if it's my monitor, but it doesn't look right to me. So I'm pretty sure those are what we call phase 2 or class 2. And then just so you know, the numbers inside of this, what says triage categories, the numbers here, sorry, are for all of Burien. So we have 23 acres of the best type, the most healthy forest, and we only have 5 acres of the worst, which is pretty great, honestly. Like it's really great. Yeah, makes my job easier. And that's usually where we have to do a lot of crew support. We have to call in professional crews, and we're doing that in Hilltop. Actually, Hilltop Park is one of those places we're writing grants for and trying to get some more funding, because it is in an area that needs a lot of care and it has some of the worst, you know, the least healthy forest. But we've done this assessment for all of the parks, and we have that in the 20-year plan. We do this because if we don't, these forests will be lost. With the active work of people like Brenda, who's on the call, I'm calling you out, they will be restored. And so we'll actually have baby plants, you know, baby trees. And when some of us will no longer be here in 100 years, me, then there will still be forests in Burien. We do this through invasive removal. We replant native plants. We maintain those, you got to keep them alive. And then we keep an eye on them. We evaluate them and keep going back and checking on those areas. Speaking of some of our awesome stewards, these are some people, you can see this since 2020. This is at Seahurst, which is really kind of an interesting time because we have a steward group who is working to steward and help that wetland down there. I don't know if you all know the area I'm speaking of, but where the creek comes out, there's a lot of invasive reed canary grass, clematis. It's kind of an invasive soup down there. And it's probably due to the armament and like some issues there. And some of the natives have probably died because we de-armored, which is okay, but we really probably need to do some control so that we can replant and so that we can ensure that that area stays healthy for many, many years. But we have over 500 volunteer hours. And I've got to say this year, this team at Seahurst, among others, Andrew and others at Arbor Lake are really keeping our numbers going, which is amazing. We don't have a lot of volunteer events right now because we are asking stewards to work in small groups with people that they already know, just due to like, not a pod, they'll stay within not within 6 feet of each other, they'll stay socially distant, so I'm trying to say, but just kind of keeping our numbers low. But I will say, sorry, I'll skip to this. I do have a pin in here that, if you are a forest steward or if you're just doing some of this work and want to tell us about it, we'd love to know. It helps us get grants. If you're removing litter, I know Carly and I were talking about this, if you're removing litter, let Gabby, let me know. If you don't know Gabby, here's my email. I'll forward it. Carly will forward it to her. Because it helps all of us when we know how much care is needed in an urban forest, but also when we know how much the community's invested, and when city council knows, and when the city manager knows. These are actually really good things. I do want to mention, I'm just going to say this really quick. We are working on some tree retention policy on private land. Thanks to the Bullet Foundation, they helped us write a report. I got to work on that with some of my friends and staff and the city of Burien. It was awesome. And so some of that is happening. Finding money to implement it, to actually help people write policy, is hard. So we are applying for grants and things like that. And I know that there are many residents who say that couldn't come fast enough. Do want to let you know we are doing another tree distribution. Look out for more info. I'm not quite sure when we're going to have it. Planting season ends in March. It will start again in October. We will do it sometime. That's not the summer. So, hoping we can do it safely. We did it pretty safely this time, but it was a little bit of a hardship for some people. So trying to do it in a way that's a little bit more, user-friendly, I think. And we had to wait a really long time for our trees. So look out for some more info on that. And if you email us, you can definitely get on our email list. And thank you for supporting our urban forests, and that we will take some questions.
I definitely want to thank you both for sharing your information, your insights, the work you're doing on the ground, and what's to come. It is refreshing to see some great news, but also to know we did dig our boots in and keep up the great work. And I do see a question in here. Joanna is asking, why do you think the percent canopy is lower near schools? Does it have to do with student safety or visibility?
Yeah, it's a great question. I will say this is, I mean, we're people, so we have a lot of ideas about what safety is. And yeah, you're right. I know that when we look at numbers, if you can do some good research, but I can tell you what I know, and that is, after Columbine and other school shootings, we saw a huge drastic reduction in canopy in and around schools. And we also know that that did not make schools safer. So although there are some feelings about whether or not that works, unfortunately, what we saw was like lower, it reduced student outcomes to have less trees. We know that now. And what I really see, and Daniel could speak to this a little bit too, but like that's what we're seeing is there's a lot more models like, oh no, we have to build back what we lost, because we have found that actually hasn't made anyone safer. It's actually reduced outcomes for students. It's made schools hotter. They're more expensive to maintain. There's all sorts of like interesting correlations that have come out of that. And that said, I also understand, that the idea behind it. I agree with Daniel. I taught at a really forested school, and to be fair, it was a public school. It wasn't in like some great neighborhood, and sometimes as a teacher leaving at night, you're like, oh, it's kind of dark and forested around here. But then also like with my students, I just think of like what a safe place that was, that they had these places to go and explore. And I know Carly does a lot of environmental education, and what you see when students are able to have some of those, like even autonomy, being around a forest, or interacting with plants and interacting with trees, it's a hard one, because I understand where there's some issues about sightlines and things like that, but I guess if we listen and follow the science, the truth is that doesn't make us safer, and that trees actually, and like well cared for green spaces, they do improve the safety of a city. They reduce crime rates. You can look those statistics up. So although it's counterintuitive sometimes to our brain or like what we think, that's the science. And so, it's just one of those places that's a really good question, because I think, everyone understands. I was a student when that happened. And so I understand the like gut emotional reactions that happened. We're having to shift our our planning, like our landscaping of schools now. And I don't know that that specifically happened here. That's just statistically true, kind of nationwide.
And it seems like you're saying a lot of programs are a little halted right now and some are to come. So are some of the main tips you would say for people to go outside safely to enjoy the benefits of nature in the ways that they can?
Absolutely. I think it's a good reminder too that, you know, I was telling Carly this, it's something for me, as I'll just say, I got to work for the Park Service for a little while, and now I get to do this. And I never really talked to city councils and mayors and things like that before this job. And so, you know, I got to talk to a lot of people in my Park Service job who were really well versed, like they're superintendents of a park, like a national park. They knew all about trees. And you know what I want to say is that also just you showing up and being in these spaces doesn't just happen to make you feel good. It also, like, your support of parks and places like that, and maybe like if you want to write a letter or share it on your Instagram and tag that you were at, you know, at City of Burien Parks, or like whatever you want to do. Like, I've been so impressed by how much our councils and our city staff really care about what residents care about. So I think another and like empowering thing is just by enjoying and talking about how much you value the urban forest, how much you value your parks. Like, you're spreading that message to everyone, and then also you're kind of reinforcing some of the things that you want to see in your city, which I think is really, really cool. And I don't know, I don't have kids, but I think also if you had children or children in your life, which I do have children in my life, you're also like reinforcing those values for older people and younger people who witness how you're doing. But I will say personally, I have been really using nature during quarantine as a place to meet up with people from a 6-foot distance and take a walk sometimes, or to just get out and find some relief from some of the stress. So I'm sure you too, Carly. It looks like I know Daniel does, because we work together, so I get to hear about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I was also excited to hear about some of the birding connections, because that is what we are going to be discussing in our next session. The birds are out enjoying the trees. The more trees we have for them to be in, the more we can see them, we can support them, which is really exciting. I want to thank you both for taking the time to share what you know here with us. I want to thank everyone who is here for taking time to share as well, to ask some questions, to focus our energy on ways to center ourselves with the outdoors and to enjoy the outdoors. This has been great insight to see the positive things that are happening and how we can make a difference here. So thank you for participating, and remember, this is the second session. We will have our final session at the same time next week, but if you can watch these on replays, we will be putting them on YouTube as well. And in the last session, we'll talk about some of our local birds and ways that you can help identify them, and then help count them and make them count. So we can help teach you how you can do some community science projects in your backyard all across the world. So spread the bird word. So thank you all. Collectively, well, I'll say thanks to you and wave to all our friends in the community. See you later.
Thanks, everybody.